From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
The danger here is not theoretical. The danger here is proven. It is clear these substances can cause harm to a baby's developing brain and nervous system, both while they're in utero and after birth. Impacts can include things like the permanent loss of intellectual capacity, and they've also been linked to things like ADHD or autism. All four of these antagonists in this story are linked to IQ loss from exposures early in life. The evidence is here. There's hard science behind it. The science behind it spans decades. The research is ongoing, and it keeps proving the same stuff. There were at least 23 studies published in the last 7 or 8 years that confirm the impact specifically of these toxic heavy metals on the healthy development of children. These studies are available. These studies are things that manufacturers of baby food would have been well aware of at the time, at least in part, it appears, according to Congress, because their own internal testing confirmed it.
Yeah. So let's now jump to the FDA. And like, what do they say? What are the safe levels of some of these heavy metals? Are there any safe levels? What does that look like? How do you measure that kind of stuff? Well, in order to get a handle on this, we are forced to look at drinking water statistics and FDA guidelines and a couple like EPA guidelines for drinking water. So according to this congressional report and according to the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA has a limit allowable level of some of this stuff in bottled water. So when you're talking about arsenic, it's 10 parts per billion of this inorganic arsenic, this particular type of the metal. When you're talking about lead, it's capped at 5 parts per billion as the allowable amount, and cadmium, 5 parts per billion. Okay, so really low, 10, 5, and 5 parts per billion to be safe in drinking water. The EPA, when it looks at this, has capped the allowable level of mercury in drinking water at 2 parts per billion. Again, almost nothing. Almost zero. But then we got to look at the test results of these baby foods, and it is pretty astounding, the levels that were found.
Right. The test results for baby food and their ingredients, back to your earlier point, Matt, Congress says they eclipse those levels. There are results that are up to 91 times the allowable level of arsenic, again in bottled water, up to 177 times the level of lead, 69 times, the level of cadmium, and up to 5 times the level of mercury. And again, remember, we said mercury is the one that seems to occur the least often. So why are we using bottled water? Why? Matt, why did you say we're forced to use the standards for bottled water?
Well, that's because there are no FDA standards for these heavy metals in baby food. They don't exist. There are no standards for them.
That's
Why?
wild.
Why? Because they're babies. Fuck them. Sorry.
Oh, wow. No, Matt was at the meeting. The FDA.
Oh, that's what it feels like. It feels like insanity. I don't understand.
Yeah. It's unacceptable. And we want to be clear when we're talking about institutions doing this kind of stuff, we're not saying you working for the FDA or your friend working for the FDA is somehow inherently a bad person. These are things that happen collectively with institutions. Maybe there were some lobbyists putting their thumb on the scale. I would not at this point be in the least surprised. Maybe there was just an overwhelming amount of paperwork, but the end result is that kids are literally eating lead and cadmium and arsenic and mercury. So that is where we are now. There are some proposed limits, but the FDA doesn't have these hard limits in. That's why we had to compare it to bottled water. What is to be done? Well, as we said at the top, this does not have an easy answer. There's not one particular institution that can correct it. If the FDA came back today and said these levels have to be this, then manufacturers would, of course, be legally bound to scramble to meet those constraints. But look, it's so easy to make someone the bad guy. It's not as if these manufacturers are like sitting around on their coffee break from their Illuminati meeting or their Bohemian Grove meeting and saying, you know what would be fun? It would be a real kick for all of us. Since we're out of adrenochrome, why don't we just start adding stuff to baby food? They didn't think about it like that. They didn't scheme to purposefully put dangerous substances in your children's food. That food comes from somewhere else. It doesn't come from those factories, right? It comes from the soil. And that food grows in the soil using nutrients and using water. When the land and the water and the air are contaminated, then we are already starting out at a fundamental disadvantage in the supply chain. Even if you're $1 billion company, right now, there are only so many places in the world where you can get certain crops. It's true. That's just a reality. That's not a hot take. So these substances are also all elements that are occurring in the wild now because they've been frequently used in pesticides for like the last century or so. And they didn't ever go away. They're still in the soil. They're still in the groundwater, even if they stopped being used in pesticides decades ago. That doesn't mean the missteps of the past were somehow negated, and the bill in short comes due.
Yeah, that's very true. And there's also a lot of these, particularly lead, that were just pumped out into the air through automobiles for a long time. When you're thinking about diesel and the lead that was contained in there, lead paint, all kinds of lead products that just ended up in the environment. There are a lot of reasons that the soil itself, as you said, Ben, is going to be contaminated because the air was contaminated, because the water was contaminated at some point, because X was contaminated at some point and continues to be polluted and contaminated. And it is a very tough situation knowing that I think it's around 1% of the Earth's land area is actually able to be or to be used for producing crops. It's a very small amount of the earth that humanity can actually use to grow its food. And, what are you going to do when you can't use it? Let alone the whole, was it the phosphorus?
Yeah.
The phosphorus thing where we're running out of phosphorus.
That's been on your mind for a while.
It really is on my mind, dude.
It also may be, to take us in maybe a hopefully less depressing tangent. Did you know that phosphorus is being considered as one of the markers of possible life on other planets or intelligent life? Like in the search for stuff, the human species has been looking for evidence of water, evidence of other things like carbon, etc. But phosphorus may end up being the key. It's more important than a lot of people think. And
don't let them fool you, Ben. They're just looking for phosphorus so we can take it and bring it back here because we need it.
Phosphorus heist?
Yeah,
I'm down. I would crew on that mission. According to the World Bank, the percentage of arable land, percentage of the world's total land area that could be considered agricultural, it's pretty high. It's 37.7%. But the part that can be considered arable land, which is what I think we're really talking about, is only 10.6%. And that number may decrease over time.
A little better than 1%. So thank goodness. Thank goodness.
For now.
Well, all right.
But okay, so here's another question. If the FDA has not set those minimal levels, it's a messed up question, but it's one our show has to ask. Are these manufacturers breaking the law in their conspiracy to put profits over the health of children. It is a conspiracy, totally, but is it an illegal conspiracy at this point?
That's tough. I'll have them talk to my attorneys. Wait, I'll have to hire some attorneys, but I don't want to get into that. Yeah, I don't want to get sued by these guys, you know?
By Big Baby?
No, please, not that.
So there are advocates who believe that there's a strong legal case here. About a week after that report published earlier this February, a law firm got involved. Their name is Baum, Hedlund, Aristey, and Goldman, and they have started accepting lawsuit cases about toxic baby food for parents who purchase food from any of those brands and have children who have been diagnosed with autism or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But again, none of that cleanses the ecosystem of these contaminants. And from what we understand of the current science, nobody really knows how to 100% get the genie back in the bottle here. Or if there is a way, it's still largely theoretical, and multiple institutions are unwilling to bear the cost of the attempt itself. So the current hope right now, amidst the nonprofit groups, the concerned parents, the politicians, everybody, is that the findings of these and other studies might spur manufacturers to do more testing and to change their practices as much as possible to get these levels down. But then we have to ask about the other folks in the crowd, the other folks who are affected by this supply chain, the parents. Like, what if you are listening to this episode and this is the first time you're learning about this? Your first question is, what the hell do I do now?
Yeah, what the hell do I do? And in order to discuss that, you have to talk about a few things. The first one is that it appears, because of how these heavy metals function, we are talking about a cumulative effect when it comes to these things. And it's not you get dosed one time by eating, a particular baby food that has some arsenic in it, and then now your child has issues. The problem is it's cumulative. So I've been watching way too much daytime TV where they've had experts on talking about this, Ben. I've been watching so much. You remember that show, The Doctors?
Vaguely, yes.
They did a fairly good job, actually, by having numerous experts on and getting some competing opinions here. But the takeaway from all of them together, I would say, is that pediatricians say that you just need to, if you are feeding your child baby food, you need to just limit the number of these things they're eating and supplement it with really fresh fruits. Generally, it's what they're saying, and grains, not rice. That's just the first thing. I'm just going to put that out there. That's what I have heard, and that your child is not, in danger just for eating, one pouch or whatever that has some of these metals in it.
Right. This is not a death sentence. This is there's a cumulative aggregate effect at play with exposure to almost any substance.
But it does make it, there's a trust issue then that I have, at least personally, when it comes to this stuff, because as a parent, it feels like the trust between me and these baby food manufacturers has been broken. Then it's making me question, the advice I'm getting from daytime TV experts who are being paid to go on television, and who a lot of times are sponsored by these big companies. So it's tough to know. It's really tough to know. The good thing is that there are all kinds of resources out there online that you can check out. You can educate yourself, and you can make the best decisions, at least that you can for you and your family.
Yeah, and some of the nonprofits we mentioned earlier have advice as well on how to combat the rate of heavy metal consumption by exactly as you described, Matt, finding safer alternatives to baby foods that may be on these lists or found to contain these substances. oatmeal instead of rice cereal or barley, etc. Maybe frozen bananas to replace teething cookies or biscuits. However, as any current or expecting parent knows, the cup of unsolicited parenting advice runneth over, and these sources of advice are not created equally. Don't be fooled. I mean, you don't assume that everybody's automatically a bad actor, but don't let someone's opinion or persuasive writing fool you into thinking what you are reading is automatically factual. It stinks right now that the burden of research is on people who have often just entered the busiest time of their adult lives and are trying to sleep occasionally. It stinks that part of that burden falls on you as a parent to do the digging, do the research, to not be afraid of writing directly to companies with questions. If you don't feel like you're getting satisfactory answers, searching online, I guarantee you these companies have people whose entire job, their full-time job, is to field and answer these questions. So they will be there. And then even if you find a blog that you really like, look for the science, look for the boring stuff, look for the numbers, look for the studies. That congressional report is available freely online. The studies that we mentioned are also freely available online. This stuff is not, this is not a secret military program. Hopefully, this stuff should all be declassified and for public consumption. And now we arrive at your part of the story. As Matt and I said at the top, we need your help. How do you think this contamination can or should be addressed? Do these companies owe any kind of compensation to the children and the parents involved? I mean, how would that even work? That's a huge question. And perhaps most importantly, do you have a personal story or experience you would like to share with us or your fellow listeners? If so, please let us know. We try to be easy to find online.